Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 194 of the Kiss Army Nation podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Pasquale Veri.
And I am Claude Espera. Welcome to the show, everyone. So, 6 albums, 2 distinct eras, one legendary band. On this episode, we're going to compare the rough and gritty energy of their first 3 records to the polished, larger-than-life anthems of their next 3 albums. So, was the change for the better? Or did something get lost along the way? So which versions truly defines the band? So buckle up, Kiss Army. On this episode, we're joined again by our dear friends, Patrick de Montigny and Craig Patton. How are you doing, guys?
Super.
Yeah, very good. Nice to be here.
I hope you're ready for tonight because it's going to be a larger-than-life topic. So what we're going to be doing essentially is taking a look at this topic from 3 different perspectives: songwriting and musicality, production, impact, and legacy. Now, keep in mind, for each perspective, we're going to determine if that change for each of those perspectives was for the better. And then we're going to end the episode discussing which era, so the first trilogy or the second trilogy of albums, truly defined the band. Claudio, want to get us started?
This is lovely, man. This is going to be a blast. So let's get this going. So on the perspective of songwriting and musicality, so was there a drastic change in songwriting between the debut album to Love Gun? Was it for the better? So Craig, start with you.
Guys, I think that yeah, there was a definite difference. The first album I think was more raw, and I think Patrick used the phrase one time, dangerous, where I think the songs were not more about, partying and sex and stuff like that. It was more like Black Diamond, 100,000 Years. Those ones are like really, staples from the Kiss catalog. Love Gun was more, to me, I think it was more melodic, more refined. Like you can even tell the difference in the sound. It's more of a stereo versus a mono sounding. I think the production was much more hyped for Love Gun too in that era. I think that also that musically it was different. I mean, they're different genres for sure, right? I just think that there is a difference, and I think it was planned, and I think it was definitely strategically placed. That the first 3 you can see they were very hungry, and the albums they come out with, it's definitely more trying to find a place. Whereas coming to like the later albums like Love Gun for stuff like that was more of a targeted approach where they had a vision of where they want to go, and it was definitely a different era.
So Craig, do you think that was it for the better, this change?
I think so. I think the songs from the next 3 albums, I think they were definitely a more not mainstream, but more. It's just totally different. You know what I'm saying? It's
yeah.
hard to explain it unless you're a real Kiss fan. But I think it was for the better. Yeah, because
Okay.
more into the more popular era. Yeah.
Okay. Patrick, what's your take on this one?
Well, for those of you who may have read the book Kiss and Sell, Kiss was wanting to become Super Kiss in 1979, but I actually believe that they were Super Kiss by 76. Because I always tend to try to look what was going on in the rock world, and rock was becoming stadium, no longer music in the bars or tiny places. Rock had become like stadium. So therefore, Kiss followed. I'm not sure it was the intention, but that's how it became. So where I'm going with that is that the first 3 albums, Kiss was a large cult band. They were popular, but it was like, yeah, there's this band, man, Kiss. They're really radical and different. And by the time Alive came out, then there was like the next phase, and then was it more polished? Certainly in the case of Destroyer, but Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, they were as raw as the first 3, I believe, but they had a better production.
Okay.
But I think both coexist nicely in that first era of the band. And you know, it's hard to say which one is a classic. I think they can coexist. They complement each other, I think, because it was the next step for them.
But if we concentrate on songwriting and musicality,
Yeah.
so do you think that this evolution was for the better for the band?
Probably, because I think when they had someone like Bob Ezrin I'm not going to talk about the part where Ace didn't play, but like for Peter, for instance, apparently Peter said he pushed me to deliver the goods and to be. So I think in a way, yeah, it was good because people said in the beginning these guys didn't know how to play, which we all know was not true. But by that time, the second part, they had worked their craft and they were getting better at it for sure. So I think in musicianship, yeah, it was probably better, especially Love Gun. You listen to Peter's drumming in particular, and even Rock and Roll Over, you got, okay, like he progressed. So I think, yeah, musicality. And also they forced them to be, to because the songs that had been on the first album were sort of like floating around for a long time, whereas now they were forced to write and
new stuff.
Delivered the goods. Yeah.
Good. My partner in crime. So, Pasquale, what's your take?
I'm not sure if I'm too tired tonight or if this is going to be a difficult night, because I feel that this is going to be a difficult topic. This is really complicated. Now, okay, so I believe that, especially with the first three albums, Kiss didn't know who they were musically. They were trying different things. With the first album, they came out of Wicked Lester. They had those songs from Wicked Lester, and they just gave it a hard rock edge to it. So they knew that we wanted to be this dark, this strong, powerful rock band. So they converted those songs into strong rock songs. Now I look at the first six albums like the band trying to find a balance. And with the first album, they started to get that balance a little bit. With the second, with the third, but they never actually reached that balance. It's like, okay, what do we do now? And yes, they came out with Alive, and it shot them through the stratosphere. But we're talking about the first three and second three records in terms of songwriting and musicality. So then they threw in Destroyer. Let's do something different. Let's turn up the amplifier. So that balance went from low to close to medium to high. That balance still wasn't there. It was, at that point, it was too much. And it was with Rock and Roll Over, I feel, that they got that balance. And I feel that balance continued with Love Gun. So in terms of their songwriting, yes, it absolutely changed between the first trilogy and the second trilogy. Musically, yes, I feel that it was a lot more powerful, the second trilogy, than the first trilogy. And I'm not sure that Craig was saying, is it because of production or the songwriting and musicality? Yes, the production had a big part of it. We'll talk about that later. But in terms of the songwriting, and I say that because I remember, and I mentioned this before, I never really liked the first three albums as a kid. I found it was too hard for me, And I remember listening to Detroit Rock City, and that to me was like, oh my God, this was powerful. This was a strong song. This defined the band. And to me, it always, the scale was always so much higher than in the first three albums. So I think in terms of their songwriting and musicality, they had to step it up. They couldn't continue what they were doing with the first three albums. I'm not sure the band could have continued musically or with their songwriting if they didn't evolve with Destroyer. Destroyer was such a necessity for the band in terms of their musicality and their songwriting. Say what you want about the album, and I know how fans felt about it when it first came out. I know how Kiss felt about it when it first came out. But that record taught them that we could do anything. We could be anything. We could sound larger than life. We can do this. And I think that is the beginning of what Patrick was saying, that Kiss was that super band. And I believe, yeah, it was in 76 and 77. Absolutely.
So let me ask you something, Pas. So over time, did you learn to digest those first three records? So
Oh, yes.
the ones that it didn't grab you at the beginning, now for you it's like this is really part of the Kiss DNA?
Oh, absolutely. But if I remember correctly, I started to digest the first three albums in the 80s when I was rediscovering the band and
Okay.
going back into their catalog. But for me, going back into their catalog always started with Destroyer.
Okay.
It's no coincidence it was the record that got me into the band. Detroit Rock City was the first song I've ever heard. Maybe that's a coincidence, and you can't fight that memory.
Right.
Part of my childhood.
Right.
But I can't help but think that this, to me, musically, in terms of their songwriting, was Kiss at their absolute best. Those three albums, absolute best.
Okay. Well, we're going to touch on this from many different angles. So, but this is interesting. In my case, I'm with you guys. So I have the feeling that just to keep it short and sweet, I have the feeling that the first three was really raw energy, not a lot of production going on. I'm talking about songwriting and musicality. They were learning actually how to play, how to get better. You know, they were having a lot of there was a lot of buzzword, live, but they couldn't actually replicate, the impact that they had live on the records. And here we're discussing the records, right? So we're going from a very early and I have to say maybe innocent debut album to Harder Than Hell, which we can discuss forever about the production and the sound and everything. And then they went a little bit more rocky with Dress to Kill and Neil Bogart on production. But I think that in terms of songwriting and musicality, the evolution was for the better with the second trilogy. Definitely, to me, that's pure Kiss. Although I love those first three, but I think that the sound and the production that captures what Kiss is, you can find it on Love Gun, on Rock and Roll Over. I don't know much about Destroyer, because Destroyer, I think it's a beast in its own. It's different from the rest, but definitely, just to wrap it up, a positive evolution from the first three to the second three.
And you see, this is where this topic is a lot more complicated, because now we're going into production, the perspective of production.
Yeah.
Now, do you think Destroyer was a necessary shift, or did it take Kiss too far from their raw rock roots? So was Destroyer a good shift for the band? Was it for the better? Pat, what do you think?
Initially, I think the fans from the beginning didn't know what to do with it. But as time progressed, it showed that, yes, it was a necessity. Proof being that a lot of the core songs were still in the set list up until the very last minute. So that's saying something. So it's probably that album that was hard to digest at first. And then when you got what they were trying to do, it's like, oh, okay, this is brilliant stuff. This is Kiss going a step further. And yeah, I think there are a few weak moments on the record, even though it's Destroyer. But I think overall, it was a necessary step to prove that, yes, they could play their instruments and they could do something well. So they didn't have to do 4 or 5 Destroyers, but that one record, I think, yes, it was necessary progress.
Okay, good. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that it also threw them into the mainstream with the release of Beth and that. I think that it brought them into a different genre. People were saying, "Who are these guys, Kiss?" And then all of a sudden, they go into it and they get the song and then they win People's Best Choice and all of a sudden they started saying, "Okay, well now we know who this band is, right?" Like Pat was saying, that most of the songs are still staples on the set list up until the very end. And I think it was a necessity to survive with sales, like the production of sales and the volume of sales that album generated for the band from that song Beth and from Detroit Rock City, it needed to come there to keep them going. I mean, it was like from raw to definitely um, a different stratosphere. Bob Ezrin is a genius when it comes to putting albums together with different bands and with Kiss. If you look at for example, Alice Cooper, and his career was like fading, and then he puts out Welcome to My Nightmare, and that's basically the destroyer for Kiss. He just like puts them into another stratosphere. I mean, I think that if you want to say someone who boosted the career mostly, I think it is Bob.
Okay. Claudia?
Well, here's my take. To be completely honest, man, I would have loved to be during those years and actually experience the evolution from the first three albums and Alive to the release of Destroyer, because having got into the band in 79 and then going backwards, trying to check their music from the previous albums doesn't give me the transition of how the band went from raw, as you said before, roots to something more polished. So I have mixed feelings about that. The only thing I can say is that now, 50 years later, we can say that it worked. I don't know if it was a necessary shift. That's what I'm trying to say. But it did work because, as Craig and Pat were saying before, most of the songs on that album, make it to the set list. They're big hits. They could capture new audiences with Beth. They were trying to write to, let's say, a more extensive, people, not only, the rock and roll kind of a theme and lyrics that they were putting on the first three albums. So commercially speaking and business-wise, it worked. So if we take into account that the band, has been on the road for 50 years with a lot of success, commercially speaking, I think it was a necessary shift. I think if they could have come up with another Dress to Kill or another Harder Than Hell, maybe they wouldn't have survived.
Okay, I've got so much to say here. I was listening to an episode of The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn, and he was talking about that particular shift and how when Destroyer was released, the fans didn't like it. They didn't like the production. It wasn't Kiss. And even the band started to panic. And the album wasn't doing well. And, when Destroyer was released and the album wasn't doing well, they were working on Rock and Roll Over. We got to go back to our roots. We just can't leave it with Destroyer. And then Beth came out and, shot Destroyer through the roof. And I think that's the point. This was a necessary shift because I teach leadership. And in leadership, you learn that you have to come out of your comfort zone to basically learn, to evolve, to move forward. If Kiss continued their songwriting and musicality in the lines of the first three albums, I'm not so sure how far the band would have gone.
Yeah.
How much can the live experience have sustained the band if the band didn't make amazing music? Mm-hmm. And the first three albums, and I remember being a fan in those days, and the first three albums, people didn't care about the songs. They cared about the experience in concert. And the songs were basically a soundtrack to the bombastic show. But they needed to evolve to greater lengths for them to move forward musically and with their songwriting. And say which one again about Destroyer, that shift was absolutely better. And it was for the betterment of the band musically. Now it's interesting because the second three albums was much better in production than the first three. So you could argue, well, it's all about production. Yes, I think a lot of it is about production because if you put the songs from the first three albums live, compare it to songs from the second three albums live, they're just as bombastic. Yeah. They're one of the same.
Yeah.
But they sound amazing on record. And it needed to sound amazing on record to keep the fans wanting more, because it has to start with the songwriting and the record. It can't start with the live experience.
Yeah.
Maybe at the beginning it can, but after a while, they need to prove themselves on record first.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because we've always talked about the impact that Destroyer had on so many fans, and we're not talking just only the music, but even the cover. Okay, so if you take the complete package of what Destroyer was, so that's actually what created the superheroes stuff for Kiss, which wasn't there with Alive, which wasn't there with the previous three albums. So that's, to me, a new era in itself, Destroyer. So they created that.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping the perspective of production, which is something, I think we could be talking about this forever. So was working with different producers like Kenny Kerner, Richie Wise, Bob Ezrin, and Eddie Kramer. The first two, in the first trilogy, and then Bob and Eddie on the second. Did it have an impact on the Kiss sound? And if so, was it for the better, Pasc?
Another interesting question. It was almost an impossible job for Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise to produce like the first three records, because again, the Kiss sound was so new. It was so different. Who is this band? And it was up to them to produce an album for a band that was unknown, different. What do we do with this? Where do we go with this? Is this heavy metal? Is this rock? Is this pop? What is this? And you got a little bit of everything in the first three albums. And the production was minimalistic in the first three albums. But in a sense, I kind of like that, because it kind of complements the live shows in the early 70s. In a sense, it was also for Kiss minimalistic compared to what they've done after Destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of fits with their music, with their concert experience.
Mm-hmm.
But Kenny and Richie really set the stage, so to speak, and the foundation for where the band can go. And they made the job so much easier for Bob and Eddie, especially for Eddie, because Bob came in and goes, okay, this is easy. Look at this band. It has to be larger than life. So he put everything into this album. So it went from here to all the way up there. And then Eddie comes in and goes, no. We gotta find the balance between the first three and Destroyer. And then that balance was there. And then Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, that is Kiss. So that shift was definitely important, between those first three albums and the last three, and Kenny and Richie building that foundation, Bob putting a bomb in it and exploding it, and then Eddie bringing it back down and finally giving it the balance that it needed.
Good takes. I liked it. Greg, what do you think?
There's not much to say, but he said it fantastic, great. Definitely different directions with different producers. One thing we got to not forget about too, guys, is when it came out to Destroyer and Love Gun and Rock and Roll Over, just touching a little bit on a previous question too, is that Kiss was more in the mainstream, and when merchandising, it was just exploding. You went from club dates to like stadium, like Pat was saying before. It was just crazy how popular they became at that time. And I think that those records and the second three are Kiss. That is the heyday for me. That is the heyday I think that they were striving to get at. And musically and songwriting wise, I think it's the three best albums that they have. During talking about production wise, I think that those ones are very polished. They're very how can I say that? Very pinpointed where they want to go and how they want to get there.
Okay. But still, I don't think you can put, Destroyer and Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun on the same, even though, it's part of the second trilogy, production-wise, they're so different. So yes, for example, Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, they could be brother and sister, but I'm not so sure about Destroyer. So Pat, what do you think?
Well, I always said, well, not always, but when I started to become a teenager and discovered more about how music worked, I always believed that a producer can either make a record or kill a record. Therefore, production is very important. In this case, I think, yes, my favorite producer has always been Eddie Kramer, because I think he knew how to balance to make Kiss sound better, and I don't like the word polished, but a better production, and yet still sound raw. This Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun are the proof. Destroyer, well, Bob Ezrin came in, like you said, okay, here's this band, we have to push it. But I think the balance was found with Eddie Kramer. Now, of course, hats off to Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise in the beginning. I think they touched on something that was, like Pask said, pretty new. And let's not forget Neil Bogart. I don't know much about him, but I don't think he was a record producer per se.
He was not. Yeah.
So, right. So to say, okay, well, I'm going to produce this. I think the production was not that bad. I think, I think when I listened to Dress to Kill, I think it a little contained, but still good enough to say, well, he did a good job.
Oh, yeah.
So, as I said, sometimes the fate of an album lays in the producer's hands. I think the second era proved it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I fully agree, guys. I don't know what else could I add here, but yeah, as you said before, a big difference and huge impact on sound. I think that just to give a couple of words on Eddie Kramer compared to Bob, I think that Bob, he always knew what he wanted, regardless of the musicians that were on the band. If he didn't get the sound that he was expecting, he was going to bring someone else, to step in. If a guitar player or whatever, was not available, he didn't care. He just wanted to have the end product, no matter what. While in the case of Eddie Kramer, I think that the beauty of Eddie was that he always had the band as the target. He knew what Kiss had to be. So I think the magic with Eddie was trying to get the best out of each one of the four. It's no rocket science here to say that he got along so well with Ace and Peter, and it's not coincidence that the sound that we're talking about, which basically defines the band's sound, it's with Eddie. In my case, I think, well, this is my opinion, that there might be people who think that actually with Bob, there's more polished and more produced and more cinematic kind of music. But I think the real Kiss came with Eddie. So yeah, well, and as you said before, Pat, hats off to Kenny and Richie on the first two attempts, to do something with not so much money and with green musicians that they didn't know even how to record something. So yeah, so big difference, big evolution, and for the better.
Now, on the topic of impact and legacy, and this is an interesting question, do you think Rock and Roll Over was a conscious return to the raw sound of the first three albums? But I want to add a question to that. What if Rock and Roll Over had the same production values as Destroyer? Where would the band have gone musically? Claudio, what do you think?
Wow. Yeah, this is a good one. Just to answer your question, if I think that Rock and Roll Over was a conscious return, yes, it was. And I think it was due to the fact that things didn't go so smooth with Bob for Ace and Peter. I don't know what could have happened if the band got along well with Bob. Maybe they could have continued, in the same trend. But it was a smart move to go back to the roots. But I think that Eddie gave it a twist. Of course, being such an amazing producer, producing bands, like Zeppelin and Jimmy and you name it. Of course, he brought another layer. Now, I for the song, and here what it's a little bit of mix here with the songwriting on Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun. If you had applied the same kind of production that Destroyer had on those songs, I don't know if it could have worked. I don't know, because I think that they came back to maybe not writing very basic stuff as in the first three, but it was more rock and roll. Okay, more rock and roll, more basic writing. Structure wise, the songs. It was not so elaborate as Destroyer. So yeah, well, I think just to wrap it up, it was a good intent to go back to the roots with an extra layer of production that to me it really worked well.
All right, Pat, what do you think?
Yeah, was it a conscious decision to go back to more rock and roll sound? I think so, because again, I keep bringing this up. I compare it to the Beatles. I think because the Beatles were only 10 years old, 10 years earlier, which is crazy when you think about it. But Destroyer was kind of like the Sgt. Pepper. Maybe not as elaborate as Sgt. Pepper, but still very out of their comfort zone. The Beatles, once they released that and Magical Mystery Tour, after that they went back to like no frills, nothing, just like four guys playing, doing what they do. They did that for the next three records, and I think I don't think they copied the Beatles, but it was like a natural move to say, okay, we did this, it was great, we experimented, that was great, and it brought us to this level. But let's not forget, we're a rock and roll band, meat and potatoes. We have to get back to that. Otherwise, we may alienate our fans. They accepted it. They had a harder time to digest it. Let's not push it. And I think that was the intention, I think, behind that. Saying we did this, now let's go back to who we are.
Okay. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great comparison for the Beatles and natural evolution of music. It's very similar. Did they copy? Maybe they did copy the Beatles' structure. Who knows? But Rock on Over for me is definitely it's one of my favorites. And look at the album cover behind me. How could you not love that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's in your face. It's eye catchy. It's when I was a kid, younger, just going off topic a bit. When I was a kid and I was going record shopping, I would always buy the albums that were cool looking. Like, if it just had Kiss on it, would I have bought it? I don't know. But if you look at these album covers, they're just like amazing, right? I think that Eddie definitely, did what he needed to do with them. It was a different sound than Love Gun. I mean, it was more, like you said, more roots but polished, right? And I mean, there's not much else to say. You guys basically said it all, and I don't know. It's when you look at Love Gun and Rock and Roll, I think those were the staples of the catalog. So
yeah. And even if we consider, the idea that Eddie had of recording, Rock and Roll Over on an empty theater, that transpires, man. So you can actually listen to the stuff in the record, which has a complete different sound, even compared to Love Gun, and that's a beautiful package, man. That's a great.
And also, I think that it's a much more maybe relaxed recording session than with Bob, because Bob was like a tyrant, right? And got the best of them musically and writing wise. And then when they go to Rock and Roll Over, it's like, okay, well, now we're back down to roots. We're in our comfort zone. We can relax and produce something that we that we feel totally great with.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the Kiss Nation.
Again, another interesting question. So number one, we know through history that it was a conscious return to the raw sound of the first three records. That we know. But was it for the better? I'm going to argue not necessarily for the better. It was the natural progression of where the band was going after Destroyer. I think that's number one. Number two, Claudio, it's something that you said about the demos. It's like those songs. If you give it to production, Rock and Roll Over, the production of Destroyer, it wouldn't have worked. But listen to the demos from Destroyer. It's in the same lines as Rock and Roll Over. They just added all that production into it, and I think maybe done right. You could have transferred that kind of production in the Rock and Roll Over album, and also the Love Gun album. Absolutely. So I think it was just a natural progression of where the band was going, and it's also a good thing too, because as we see through Kiss's history, you know with Destroyer it was lightning in the bottle, and you can't recreate that. And if they tried to do Destroyer 2, the next album, it wouldn't have worked. And right. God knows where the band would have gone. Yeah. It's the same thing like Revenge. That was Lightning in the Bottle Part 2. They tried again with Carnival of Souls. Look what happened. Yeah.
True.
So, conscious effort or not, the end result, maybe just looking back, hindsight is 2020. It made sense, and it just looks and feels like a natural progression from one album to the next.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to emphasize on the fact that when we explore the catalog, 50 years later, it does make absolute sense. It looks so natural. But I'm wondering, when you're there and you see, Destroyer, being released after being exposed to Alive, and then after Destroyer you come up with the Rock and Roll Over. I'm interested to know what was the feeling from people listening to those records as they came out. It's really interesting.
Well, like Craig was saying, at the time Kiss was focused. They knew where they were going. They knew the direction. They saw the road and they were looking ahead, right? Proof is look what happened with Dynasty, Unmasked, and The Elder. And Claudio, looking back now, does that make sense? Was it a natural progression? It made absolutely no sense.
No,
and just goes to show that they lost their way during that era. But with this era, regardless of the first three, the second three, they were on that road, and that's why it looked and sounded and felt so natural.
Yeah. And I think it applies not only to Kiss, but for most of the bands, those first records actually they capture the energy, what the band is about, the creativity of those guys, writing stuff, it just flows. And then you start to have outsiders. You start to have ghost musicians. Whatever happens with the intoxication, blah blah blah. But then the band is not the band anymore. So one final question. This is really really interesting on perspective of impact and legacy. So which album do you guys believe defines each era? Craig?
I think the first era, I think the first album defined them, because it was definitely it was new type of music to the scene. Second era, I think it's a toss up between Rock and Roll Over and Destroyer. I would say more Rock and Roll Over than Destroyer. Now you might want to say that I'm wrong on that one, because Destroyer definitely brought them up a notch, but I feel that Rock and Roll Over was more refined.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, here there's no right or wrong, so it's actually
know.
goes
I know.
goes hand in hand with your taste, right?
Yeah,
On
exactly.
music and stuff. But what do you think about this?
Okay, I'm gonna cheat and I'm gonna do like my personal favorites versus I think what speaks for itself, the way I see it.
Okay.
As far as popularity, I think it's the first album and Destroyer, because I always get back to that the proof is there. A lot of the songs from the set lists are from those two albums. Let's not kid ourselves. That's how it is. However, in a case of personal favorites, I think, in my opinion, Dress to Kill from the first three. Because the band had time to gel. You listen to the unknown songs like Love Her All I Can. There's some good jamming at the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
Rock Bottom. I mean, you have these great tunes that you go, wow, I think this is, this is raw and this is cool. And for the second part, I'm with Craig, Rock and Roll Over. Big drum sound on that album. People talk about Creatures, which stands on its own as far as the drum sound goes. But when you listen to the drum sound on Rock and Roll Over, you go, wow, that's huge. And there's not a bad song on that record. Not a bad song. Just totally like it flows. You listen to it. Wow. So to me, personal favorite in the second era, Rock and Roll Over.
It could have been awesome to in the last tranche of the band to listen to more live songs from Rock and Roll Over. Eh?
I agree. Yeah.
Busk. So, which album do you believe defines each era?
Another interesting question. I think for the first trilogy, it has to be Kiss, the first album, for sure. It's the foundation of everything they've done afterwards for the next 50 years in concert and musically and songwriting. It's that first album. It set the stage. No question there. Now, the second era is interesting because in a sense, Destroyer was like, let's take a pause. Let's experiment. Let's see what we can do. We can afford to do that now. We're huge with Alive. Let's try something different. At the time, oh boy, we went too far. Let's go back to our roots with Rock and Roll Over. So, in a sense, Destroyer, if you want to look at it that way, isn't a part of that second trilogy. Yeah. It stands on its own.
Yep.
And then you have Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun. Mm-hmm. So if you look at it from that perspective, I think it would have to be Rock and Roll Over that defined that era. But if it wasn't for Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over would never have happened. And that era would never have been defined as I see it now.
Do you think that, I mean, I'm just being weird here, but do you think that maybe Destroyer was the elder of the era? You know, it was definitely different from what they were doing. I mean, it's much more better than musically, let's face it, but was it a different approach? Like, was it kind of the same, you know?
Yeah, I like the comparison.
Yeah.
Comparison. Same producer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that the elder went a little bit to the extreme, okay, because it was like too far apart from a rock album, and it was a theme album, and whatever. But yeah, it's a good comparison. We have to remember also that Bob, when he produced Destroyer, he was really young and he was not so high as he was when he did the Elder, right?
Greg, that's a fantastic question, and I'm going to argue the following. Interesting comparison. I think it really depended on how history remembered those two albums. Now, imagine if the Elder had a hit song like The Wall. I think it would have been remembered completely differently, and it would have been seen like, wow, this is different, but it elevates Kiss to a whole new level.
Yeah.
Now flip that over. Imagine if Destroyer didn't have Beth, because Beth is what elevated Destroyer.
Yeah.
I want to argue that if Destroyer didn't have Beth, I think it's possible that Destroyer would have been remembered as we remember the Elder today.
Oh, really?
Mm.
Wow.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, Armin,
Well,
tell me what you think. But yeah, I think so.
Wow. Well, I'm going to wrap up this question on which album I think defines. I'm pretty much with Pasc on this one. For the first three, I think it's the first one. Although I'm with Pat also because the one that I like best from the first three, it's Dress to Kill, more rocky, more simple, not so dark, and more party kind of music.
Mm.
And for the other three, same thing. I think Destroyer has its own place in history. But for the fun of having this discussion, we're making it part of the second trilogy. I will pick Love Gun, man. To me, Love Gun, it's the quintessential sound of Kiss, even though maybe I don't like all of the songs there, but I don't know. To me, that was super Kiss. 77, that cover there, the sound, and Ace singing his first song, and I don't know. I mean, when those chords from "I Stole Your Love," they get going, man. To me, that's pure
Oh,
Kiss.
yeah.
That's an interesting point. So basically, everything from that first album led to quintessential Kiss with Love Gun.
Yes.
Is what you're saying. Interesting.
Yes.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Good point.
All right. So it's a good segue because here's a question that ties basically everything together. So we talked about how, whether or not the evolution between these two eras was a deliberate shift in their approach, or was it a natural shift? And it's interesting, Claudia, you said about Love Gun being the quintessential of that era. But is it the quintessential of both eras? Is it the quintessential Kiss between 73 and 77? So as a result, which era best defines Kiss? The first three, the second three, and I'm going to also add, was it all 6?
Mm-hmm.
Pat, what do you think?
Okay, I'm gonna get a little esoteric here.
Nice, go for it.
I love it.
I think it's the yin and the yang here.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
Oh my God, man.
The whole thing, you need the whole thing, but I think the first 3 albums are the yin and the last 3 are the yang. So you have that balance. And I think they can coexist really nicely because a lot of people don't do what we do, separate that first era. It is considered the first classic era, and then when the dynasty became commercial, they don't divide that period like we do. So I think both need to be there because, as I said, the first era is underground dangerous band, and the second one, the stadium rock band. You put them together, and I think that's what makes it Kiss, quintessential Kiss, in my opinion.
Great point. Great point. Greg.
I think it was I'm going to read this because I think it's a long paragraph I have here. Sorry. I think it was a deliberate to survive the different eras, styles, and direction to keep it relevant. That bubblegum era, which I call the second set of albums, hooked young fans. The production was a lot more, and it was an action plan that was set up to succeed, right? It was essential for Kiss to go forward, and the popularity they received with the flash and the personas were more played out in the second 3 albums.
Yeah.
It was more of a merchandising, you got the record, you got a surprise inside. Where the first 3, you didn't get anything.
Yeah.
So I think that the second 3 albums hooked the young fans by those surprises, stickers, tattoos, whatever the case may be. But I think that definitely that the second 3 eras, the second 3 albums for me are the way to go.
Yeah. Claudio, your thought?
Yeah. So it's interesting because again, I'm coming back to what I said at the beginning. So after all is said and done, after 50 years, we can kind of we can say whatever we want. We can try to be philosophic on a master plan that that Kiss had from the very beginning. I don't think there was any master plan at the beginning. Okay, they were trying, and we've said it many, many times. Kiss has always been a band trying to stay relevant. They kind of wanted to play pop when there was pop on the radio. They wanted to play grunge when it was required. They were going to have, in the 80s, glam stuff to stay relevant in business. That's why they lasted for 50 years. So to me, one of the beauties that this band had was they were so smart to adjust at the proper time and at the right moment. Okay, so, and I think that when they realized after Alive that they needed something else to stay alive, that's when the second trilogy comes in. And smartly enough, with all came all the merch, all the Super Kiss, all the product, the Kiss company, basically.
Yeah.
So now with the band gone, as we always say, we have the tendency of concentrating more on the music. So here we're discussing music, but at the end of the day, Kiss has always been a product. So again, just to answer the question, which era best defines Kiss? Well, if you see a picture, if you see a poster, if you listen to a song, I think it's the second trilogy. You can pick any song from Destroyer, Love Gun, or Rock and Roll Over, and that's what Kiss is to me. For a number of things, not only for the music, the image. I don't think that people will be so attracted to the costumes that they were using during the Harder Than Hell tour, or the first one, or even the Dress to Kill. Although we love it because we would love to see more of the early stuff, but Super Kiss, well, to me, is the second trilogy.
I was looking forward to this question because I was talking about that balance at the beginning, and then Patrick put it together so well with his esoteric way of saying that. It was, yes, it was the balance of the first and the second eras that really defined the band. And it's interesting because that balance analogy is perfect to define not just that era, but the 50-year career of the band. Think about it. Kiss has always been at their best when they were balanced. And with Love Gun, that's when, like you were saying, Claudio, they had balance. Those, Love Gun, Rock and Roll Over, they had the balance. They were at their best because they were balanced. And then you had Dynasty, Unmasked. They lost completely their balance. And then came out with Creatures, and Creatures is sort of like the Destroyer album. Let's go back to our roots. That was an album that stood out on its own. Now we did this, we could prove to the world and to ourselves that we could be that Kiss again. So let's go back out there. But this time they took off the makeup. Yeah. Once again, they were trying to find that balance. Yeah. And they found that balance, in my opinion, with Hotter Than Hell and Revenge. And then Carnival of Souls came out, didn't matter, because now we have the reunion tour.
You meant Hot in the Shade.
Hot in the Shade, yes.
There you go.
Yes,
yeah.
Hot in the Shade. So, and then came the reunion tour. And I'm going to argue that was an amazing era, but that balance wasn't there. It really wasn't there. Yeah. And that balance with the putting on the makeup back on, sorry fans, happened with the introduction of Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer in the band. And we enjoyed that balance for 20 years up to today. So that analogy is really interesting. And like you were saying, Claudio, the band is also about selling. It's about merch.
Yeah.
And when do we get upset about merch? When there isn't a balance in the merch that's being released. Right. When we get a freaking golden record for $2,500 and $50,000, where the heck is the balance? Mm-hmm. And right now, fans are like, in a void, so to speak, because we're completely off balance from the last year since the end of the road. And now we're waiting with bated breath for what Pop House is going to do in March with the box sets, the soundboards, the merch drops, the relaunching of Kiss Online. And we talked about it in the previous episode. They have to come out of the gate strong.
Mhm.
It is up to them now to give the fans and the band the brand that balance again.
They came out strong, man. 50 grand.
I don't think that was Pop House, though. I don't think that was Pop House. Or if it was, I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to wait till March,
Okay.
and see what they're going to do.
So you skip this one. Okay.
I don't think it's Pop House because this was planned.
Right.
This was planned last year, and it was
Mhm.
postponed.
That's
Now, and it was released now. Then they probably get part of the profits because now they own the rights, but it's also part of Universal as well.
Mhm.
So I'm not gonna. You know what? You could blame Paul and Gene on this one because this was last year, but I'm not gonna blame Pop House. But Pop House has to come out of the gate strong in March to regain that balance. Because if we don't have that balance, I don't think we're ever gonna have it back. If they piss us off with skyrocketing prices for the box sets, fans are going to revolt. I'm telling you this right now.
Yeah, it's
Fans are going to revolt. This is what we've been looking forward to. This is what we're waiting for. We are not going to pay $500, $600 US for a box set. And if they do that to us, I'm out. I'm out.
I wanna. I'm recording this one, so I'm
exactly.
It's
So when he buys it, just play it back. I'm out. I think you're in.
If it's at a reasonable price, yes, I'm going to buy it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But they came out. I saw a post online. They showed an Ozzy box set, all of his solo albums, all of them, for $600.
Hmm.
And we had what, 6 records for $1,000? What are you, crazy?
Yeah.
No.
Well, let's see what happens. But in the meantime, let's keep enjoying. As we just did with our two friends here. Craig and Pat. There was a beautiful discussion, guys. I think there's a lot of food, man, here to talk about. On those first 6 albums there. So the foundation of 50 years of music. But no doubt that, of course, there's many fans of the original lineup. I think what these guys created during those first 6 albums, it's unbelievable, man. It still sounds fresh. I don't know how it is, but you can put it on today and still sounds fresh, man. This is amazing.
For sure.
A little look behind the scenes here. I love preparing these episodes. And it's like, okay, this is going to be a fun one. Who knows where it's going to go? But I often don't prepare my answers in advance. I want to see where it goes naturally in the episodes. So listening to the 3 of you, and it's like, oh wow, I never thought of it that way, or I thought of that, but this is the missing piece to my argument.
Yeah.
And Pat, if we're gonna have a star on this show tonight, it's you.
Yeah.
Esoteric. That was
the yin yang, man.
That was
Please.
beautiful.
Yin yang.
You
That
need to
was-
share. You need to
Yes.
share, my friend. What are you having, man? So this is great.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. It really tied the episode
Yeah.
and the episode together. And
Thank
I really hope our listeners enjoy this episode, enjoy this discussion, because it's a lot more complex than let's
Okay.
rate Rock and Roll Over and Destroyer. Let's look at it in a broader sense, and even broader, looking at it in terms of the 50 years. And I remember podcasters saying after Kiss did the End of the Road, it's like, what are we going to talk about after it's done? Oh my God, so much more, because
there you
now
go.
we've got 50 years of looking back
Oh yeah.
and asking ourselves, what did it all mean? We could be here for years.
This
Oh,
is
yeah.
only the beginning.
This is only the beginning. Absolutely. Absolutely. So
Thank you so
guys,
much,
once again,
guys.
thank you so much for coming on the show, taking the time to do this. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Definitely.
To the Kiss Army, we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please send them to at kissarmynationpodcast.com. Until the next time, remember, never stop rocking. Take care, everyone.